I
start?
I have started recording, so just so everyone knows, we are recording this. We post these on our YouTube channel. You can go to YouTube and search Ashland Chautauqua and see all of the book talks that we did starting back in the pandemic in 2020. We actually did a pretty extensive online programming, and all of that is posted. If you want to know the history of Chautauqua, you want to hear from 4 of the sort of pioneers of this type of Chautauqua, we have a great video about that and a Q&A session. So there's lots of things on YouTube to check out. And once I get it processed, tonight's book talk will be up there too. So I'm Delisa Randall Griffiths, and I welcome all of you here. It's good to see some familiar names. It's good to see some new names. Some of you may be joining us for the first time, or maybe I'm just not remembering the names, and that's fair too. This is our 4th book talk in this season. We have one more to go. April 27th, Larry Bounds will be here, and he will be talking about a book. It's The Life and Afterlife of Harry Houdini. So you have one more chance to join us. And we always say, come whether you've read the book or not. It's just always interesting to hear about these characters and these stories. We are in the midst of writing grants and putting together workshop schedules for our summer event. And I have a little poster right here. So if you can make it to Ashland, Ohio, July 11th through the 15th, you can come and enjoy all 5 of our scholars, Joey included, giving their first-person presentations on the main stage, but also doing workshops throughout the community all week and doing coffee with the scholar mornings. There's a lot of exciting things that will be happening in Ashland, Ohio in July. So we do ask that everyone can mute just to make sure that we don't have any interruptions, but we will open things up by just letting Joey Madia tell us a little bit about his character and a bit about the book, but then we want your questions. I have a few questions waiting in the wings to prime the pump if I need them, but please put things in the chat and I will monitor that and moderate questions after he's kind of set the stage for us, because we would love to let you guide the discussions as much as anyone else. So Joey Madia will be coming to Ashland for the first time, but he is quite an accomplished Chautauquan scholar. And I think I met him first when I was helping out with one of the workshops with Oklahoma Chautauqua, and he just last summer and was it also the summer before that you were a part of their tour, or just last summer? I don't remember.
2019 and 2022.
Okay. So we're lucky that we're going to have him in Ashland for our first time. I'm very excited about that. So let me turn things over and let him tell you a little bit to set the stage, and then we'll take your questions.
All right. Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining us tonight. I know that Zoom has become exhausting for everyone, and I can tell you I was in 5 hours of meetings on Zoom tonight, so I appreciate you. I'm going to try to make it entertaining and lively and not dry and boring. And of course, pirates. Sam Bellamy comes from what's called the golden age of piracy. This only lasted about a decade, even though it created an immense impact on history. One of the workshops that I do is called Prelude to the Revolutions, because the golden age of piracy really was a rehearsal for the American and French revolutions. And I love to talk about that. Sam is also very interesting because even though he was called Black Sam Bellamy, and I'll talk about that, he was all about liberty, fraternity, brotherhood. Many of the pirates during the early years of the golden age of piracy had articles. So in the book are listed a great example of the articles that they had. It was a kind of democracy. There's a great new book out now that a colleague told me about by a man named David Greiber, and it's called Radical Democracy, and it's about piracy in Madagascar. Now, this is about 40 years before Sam's time, but Madagascar comes into play for the whole collapse of the golden age of piracy. So Sam tells his story way better than I tell Sam's story, and I don't want to give too much away for you. I was a screenwriter, so I don't want to give away the end or make it, okay, now we heard him talk, we don't have to come to the presentation. Sam's much more eloquent about his life and passionate than I will be tonight, so as not to scare you away. So I chose this book, Expedition Whydah, the story of the world's first excavation of a pirate treasure ship and the man who found her. It's really a mouthful, but it's by this man, Barry Clifford. I will share some other titles with you. When you read the program, you'll see my bibliography. I chose this book for tonight because it's really 3 stories in one. It's beautifully woven together. So if you're interested in people like Ballard, who found Titanic, these people who search the world for these shipwrecks, and it's immensely expensive, it's dangerous, it's very technology competitive, dependent, it's very competitive. And the interesting thing is many people see them as pirates. So what I'd like to do is I have about 20 minutes, not go through the book chapter by chapter, anything like that, but tell you really kind of pull out the highlights of these 3 strands. So the first thing that you need to know is the ship was called the Whydah. Now, the Whydah was a slaver. These were, if you're familiar with World War II planes, they were like a flying fortress. They were state of the art. They were designed for 3 things: to have an immense hold, and you can imagine why. Their philosophy was that in transit, and I'll talk about the shipping routes, there were acceptable losses, which means that it was a volume business. So the hold becomes very, very important. They were fast. They were designed to be fast, and they were immensely well armed. So if you're a pirate, you want a ship like this. Very few pirates got them. I'll bring in Blackbeard as the superstar of all pirates, which is one of the reasons why he's one of the few pirates. I portray 7 or 8 different pirates. I do not portray Blackbeard because he's done to death. So this ship is called the Whydah Galley. It could go under sail, could go under oar. It's a galley. Okay. It was named for the Whydah Kingdom. Whydah means bird of paradise. I will tell you that Sam Bellamy found this immensely offensive when he chased the ship down after a three-day chase. And he asked the man, Lawrence Prince, who was a very seasoned captain, he said to him, "Sir, what does this mean, Whydah?" And when he said paradise bird, he said, "Sir, this is offensive to me. This is deeply offensive to me." But Whydah is also the name of a kingdom on the west coast of Africa, which was one of the kingdoms that participated in the slave trade. So I'll get to that. Now, the Whydah is also a very important ship because it was owned by a man named Humphrey Maurice. Humphrey Maurice was the director of the Bank of England. Of course, he was a slaver, and he was a member of Parliament. So remind you a little bit of maybe some of our founding fathers, where there's a slavery aspect, they're very hooked into the government, and then they're very accomplished business people. So being Sicilian from New Jersey, I immediately think of the mafia. Humphrey Maurice is like messing with the Don, messing with John Gotti, or messing with Tony Soprano. So Samuel Bellamy, by attacking this ship and taking it over, by stealing it, really called down the thunder. This all happened in early 1717, and by all intents and purposes, within 2 years, the golden age of piracy as we know it, the best of the golden age of piracy, was over because of this. Blackbeard took the La Concorde, which was a French ship. It was a French slaver. This is where the powerful take notice. They take notice when you really disrupt commerce. Then you are a problem. Then you need to be dealt with. So again, like the mafia, petty thieves knocking over, you know, a 7-Eleven or a Five and Dime's no big deal. But when you start knocking over a bank that's in the territory, or some of the racketeering businesses, you're taking their money before the monthly collections, you really get the attention. So that's a way to think about it. Humphrey made his money, like many of these powerful slavers did, by working the triangle. So the triangle was Europe, it was the west coast of Africa, and it was the Caribbean. To a much lesser extent, it was the American colonies, although they do play in, and I'll let you know. Sam didn't spend a lot of time in the American colonies. He worked the shipping lanes. So here's how it works. I have this nice big ship, and I fill the hold full of things that I know the African chieftains will want. This is weapons. This is different things that they valued. My ship goes and it docks in West Africa. Whydah Kingdom, some of the other areas. And you trade people for things. You load up your hold. This is extremely lucrative. Anywhere between $25,000 and $40,000 in our money is what a slave was worth on the market. These were big dollar investments, and it was cold. It was it was brutally cold. Like I said, there were acceptable losses. So if we have 2,000 souls, if we lose 500 of them, we are okay with that. That meaning, you know, Humphrey Maurice and his ilk. So Captain Bellamy, he wants to, for reasons that I'll get into later, he wants to retire. He wants to get out of the game. He wants that last big score. It really is so much like the mafia, to bring it, you know, to modern times. And so he's on the lookout. I need a ship that's going to get the job done. He started in small ships that were periaguas. They're called almost like canoes, fancy canoes, held maybe 36 people, worked his way up to sloops where maybe you had 50 people or 100 people, maybe up to 150 people. He had some flotillas, which made him Commodore, but he needed a big score so he could get to where he needed to be to do what he needed to do. Because Samuel Bellamy's interesting because he had something to prove. He had somewhat of a chip on his shoulder. He will tell you about that, but he's very motivated. So they spot this ship, this slaver. Now, he's in a sloop that maybe has 16 guns. He's going to go up against a ship that maybe has 30 guns, has a lot more men on it, but his sloop is sleek. He knows how to captain it. He's a good strategist. He's been very successful the past 2 years. He's gotten some 50 ships along with his partners and collaborators, very colorful guys he'll tell you about. And so he decides to give chase. And they're in the shipping lanes and near the Caribbean. And after 3 days, he chases down the Whydah. And I mentioned Lawrence Prince. He's in his 70s. He knows that he's outmanned. He knows that he's outgunned, even though, you know, his ship is technically bigger, better armed. He knows not to mess with the pirates. Sam will talk about that too. I think it's a big misunderstanding that pirates were killing people. They were drunk. They were slitting throats. This is the 1720 to 1725 when chaos ruled, where captains like Edward Lowe were slitting throats. They didn't want to negotiate. They didn't want to bargain. They were thugs. Sam and his ilk were not thugs. They were revolutionaries. They had been wronged. They had been cut loose after the War of Spanish Succession, Queen Anne's War, where they were legal pirates. They had letters of marque. And as soon as the treaty was signed, all of the countries of Europe said, go back to piracy, go back to poverty. We don't need you anymore. So the motivations were different. So Sam gives him 50 pounds of gold and silver, puts him on a ship that Sam no longer needs because he upgrades, and sends Lawrence Prince and his crew on their way. This is February. They go on a rampage up and down the East Coast, around the Caribbean, but they didn't really need to. It's very, very interesting because when they take over the Whydah Galley, it is full of ivory and indigo, silver, silks, gold, because it was coming. It had dropped off in Jamaica, the slaves, the African souls that they had bought, and they got all of these riches from the Caribbean, right? So the Caribbean is very important. It's another stop on the triangle because it's sugar, it's tobacco, it's cocoa, all these things that the American colonies and Europe were hungry for. They were hungry for all of these things. And that's where they were manufactured. They were incredibly labor intensive, the same way that cotton was, you know, in the American colonies 100 years later. And so they needed these slaves who expired, were literally worked to death. So you needed constant replenishment. So that triangle never stopped. It went and it went and it went. And the target area was really the Caribbean. The trade winds were favorable. There are lots of islands where you could hide out, hang out. Ships. What is a pirate ship? What is any ship of that time? It is floating plant life, folks. It is wood, it is hemp, it is plant, it is cloth, and it is continually rotting. And in the Caribbean, it was horrible. And they had these tellurine worms that would bore holes in the ship. So you had to do something called careening. So you needed a cove where you could bring the ship up, put everything to one side so the ship tipped over, take ropes, tip it over, and then clean it, and then do the other side. So the Caribbean was ideal for all of this. I'll talk about the American colonies a little more later. Well, Sam makes all these scores. Some members of his flotilla go off to do different things. Some are still going to fight the good fight, something called the Jacobite Rebellion. If there's time tonight, we'll talk about the Jacobite Rebellion. But they were fighting to get the House of Stuart back on the British throne, which to their minds, and I happen to agree with them, was usurped. It was Protestantism over Catholicism because of Henry VIII and his break with the church. It's fascinating stuff. So we come April. Sam's trying to get home to Eastham, Cape Cod, Massachusetts. A nor'easter comes up. Being in New Jersey, I was in a nor'easter. They're horrific. They're out at sea. They have 3 ships. They have about 160 men. They try to fight the storm. Little teaser. Sam talks to you an hour before he dies. And he leaves his cabin determined to save his ship. And he couldn't. Of these 169 men, 160 of them died in this storm. 9 of them washed up on the shore of Eastham, were promptly arrested by the sheriff of Eastham, and they were set to hang. This is where Blackbeard wrote to Governor Shute in Massachusetts and said, I will bring down the thunder if you kill these 9 men, if you hang them. And this was really what made Edward Teach, ex-Navy man, very, very close friend of Sam Bellamy, and Sam will tell you about that, really made him Blackbeard, put a dark cloud. He lost Sam. He was so angry that these men who God had spared in the storm were hung. So this is very complicated, this whole Sam thing here. That story involves Cotton Mather. You know him from, the witch trials and all that business. There's some fascinating books. I'll tell you about one in particular at the end of the presentation that has the transcripts of the trials of those 9 pirates. So as a novelist, it was great when I wrote about their trials. I had the actual transcripts, which was wonderful. So Humphrey Maurice got very, very angry. He lost his ship. It was at the bottom of the sea off of Cape Cod. He couldn't get vengeance against Sam Bellamy. So he arranged for a man named Woodes Rogers I mentioned Madagascar and I said it came full circle. Woodes Rogers cleared out the pirate nest in Madagascar. They said, Woods, you're the guy for the job. Now, Woods had circumnavigated the globe. He had written a bestseller for his time, a nonfiction book about his travels. He traveled with William Dampier. He was related in some ways to Alexander Selkirk, and that whole experience, that oh my goodness, washed up the novel that Daniel Defoe wrote about the castaway, is based on that. Oh, of course, Treasure Island is Robert Louis Stevenson. Sorry. So, and that really started to bring the whole thing down. The hope was that there would be a republic of pirates based in the Bahamas. Sam at one point was the Commodore. They really adhered to their articles. They really believed that they could build a democracy. They could build their own democracy outside of the world of the European governments, which were inbred. The War of Spanish Succession was because a relative of the Sun King, Louis the 14th, was going to sit on the throne of Spain. Now, why is this a problem? Because they're both Catholic countries. So the Dutch Republic and England that were Protestant said, oh, no, that's not going to happen. We're not going to have Spain and France, both Catholic from the same family. So they fought a big war about it. That's when the House of Stuart was displaced. There was a law in Parliament passed that a Catholic could not sit on the English throne. And that's what a lot of these pirates were fighting for. It's where Rob Roy McGregor comes in. You see that fella behind me. He's a fictional character, so I can't do him in Chautauqua, but his name is Angus McGregor, and he's a Highlander, and he sort of holds my whole play together that I do, where I play 7 different pirates, including Sam Bellamy. So that's where it's very, very much encompassing of the whole picture. So that's kind of what was going on with Sam. So let's flash forward 167 years. And there's this very determined man named Barry Clifford, working outside of the maritime archaeological, working outside of the anthropological and other maritime communities. He's a treasure hunter. Let's be honest. Barry Clifford is in it for the money. He's in it for the history, but he hears this rumor that there's this ship off Cape Cod that sunk with a vast treasure. Now, it was a slash and grab in the days following, as these 160 bodies were washing up on shore. Gold coins and silver coins were washing up on shore with the tides, and there was a sheriff and a cartographer. But the bulk of the treasure, right, the silks, the silver, the ivory, all the things I told you about, Sam had given each man 200 gold and silver pieces. 160 men, do the math. That's in the money. It's a big treasure. So Barry's doing his research. He's getting a crew together. The financing's a little iffy. The equipment is old. People are quitting on him. There's betrayals. That's, if you want a good salacious bit about all this, that's a reason to read this book. Very, very cutthroat. But Barry finds the ship. After about a decade, he finds a ship in 1984. And it was at the time the only fully authenticated pirate ship. 6-7 years later, the Queen Anne's Revenge was found off of Beaufort Inlet. And all kinds of artifacts and stuff are available in the North Carolina Maritime Museum. That's where I kind of made my living as a pirate storyteller for 3 years and started this whole journey. How do you authenticate a pirate ship or a ship? How do you authenticate it? With the bell. The bell has the year and it has the name of the ship. In both cases, both the Whydah Galley and the Queen Anne's Revenge, when they found the bell, that was incontrovertible proof, because you don't carry a bell from another ship on your ship. Why would you? You wouldn't. So again, budgets and are we broke, and we need to go back, but the ship is breaking down, divers almost die, betrayals. At the meantime, he's getting tons of pushback. Maritime archaeologists hate what he's doing. Archaeological and maritime societies in Massachusetts really hate what he's doing. UNESCO does not think highly of Barry Clifford to this day, because Barry legitimately found this ship. He made a huge contribution, but in the intervening 20 years, he wanted to stay in the spotlight. So he claimed to have found William Kidd's ship off of Madagascar, and everybody cried foul. He said he found the Santa Maria, Columbus's ship. Everybody cried foul, and it turned out he was lying. So Barry got a little bit of a taste of the shiny thing, but it's not all bad, because the Whydah was found in relatively shallow water, a ship that was missing for almost 300 years, and it's in 16 feet of water. Really interesting. So they did a thorough excavation job. They opened up a museum in Provincetown, Massachusetts, the Whydah Museum. I've yet to get up there. COVID really threw a wrench in my plans to go up there and spend some time with them and do some studying. They now have thousands of artifacts, from canon to personal items, a very, very interesting ring that they think was owned by a Royal Navy man who may have gone to the side of the pirates. That happened very often. Rare fragments of African gold jewelry, colonial era objects, all these different kinds of things. They have a huge replica of the deck of the ship. So if you ever get up to Provincetown, whether you're into pirates or not, the museum is very, very cool. And the treasure has been valued, if you're ready, at somewhere around maybe $400 million in today's money, because of these. Pieces of 8 or reals, Spanish. They found tons of these, so much of this, because it was laden with treasure. Remember, everybody got 50 pounds. Everybody got literally 50 pounds. Not, like a pound like we have the dollar, but literally 50 pounds of this, gold and silver. This is what it was all about. This is what funded the pirates. There was a Spanish fleet in 1715 that got caught in a hurricane. The Spanish plate fleet coming from the Spanish Main, from the mines in Peru and so forth, silver and gold mines, and that funded the pirates. There's one more thing that I want to tell you, and Sam will tell you the rest, and then we'll have hopefully an interesting discussion, and I can show you some toys if you want, some show and tell. But I told you that Sam was very determined to get back home. Here's why. He had fallen in love. So long story short, Sam has a family in Devonshire, England. They have farmed for generations, going all the way back. He'll tell you about it. It's very impressive lineage. And they're pushed off the land by nobles. Nobles who said very cleverly, this land in the middle of all your homesteads, who owns this land? And of course, Sam's father, who was sort of the headman, the ombudsman, sort of, if you will, said, nobody owns it. We all share it. And the noble said, well, now it's ours. So all that grazing land went away, which means they had less land to farm on their individual farms. They all pretty much went broke, which was the idea, drive them out. So they wind up in the city. They wind up in Portsmouth. Sam has like 6 sisters. His mother died in childbirth. His father's a drunk. He's very resentful. So Sam becomes a privateer, fights in the War of Spanish Succession. And his captain, after 10 years, retires. Sam is 27, retires around Cape Cod. So Sam gets a job doing odds and ends, and he goes to work for a fisher, a man who sells fish, and he falls in love with his daughter. Sam was 27, Goody was like 17, but he's deeply in love. And he asks her father for permission to marry her. And he says, no, I'd rather she dry an old widow and blow away than marry someone like you. So Sam says, all right, give me a couple years. I'm going to make my name. I'm going to make my fortune. I'm going to come back and I'm going to marry your daughter. You're going to ask me to marry your daughter. So Sam was very careful not to be killing people, to do things as cleanly as he could. So he dies. He dies after being away for 2 years. He dies within sight of Eastham. When Angus tells the story, Sam tells the story, and he says, and Angus says, it was very sad that my friend Samuel Bellamy died, but perhaps it's best that he died. And Angus goes on to tell the story that this 17-year-old girl, Goody Hallett, who would be 18 or 19 now, Goody or Maria Hallett, Hallett. Sam had gotten her pregnant before he left, and she didn't know. Well, at that time, a woman who got pregnant out of wedlock, this was horrible. This was devil stuff. They were often whipped in the public square, where I used to present in the historic grounds in Beaufort several times a week. Cat of nine tails hangs on the wall, and it was taken to the backs of single mothers. Her father has her arrested. She's pregnant in this prison, and the jailer takes pity on her. So he hides her in his barn. The baby is born. The baby chokes on a piece of straw and it dies, and Goody hangs herself. Unfortunately, they call her the Witch of Eastham. That's the legend. Goody wasn't a witch. She got caught up in something bigger than her. Her father did what he thought was right. It led to the death of her baby. It led to her death. And maybe it's better that Sam didn't know. Maybe it's better that Sam died, at sea doing his thing, what he loves. So I turn it all over to you.
What a tragedy story you end with. We do have a question, and please put more questions in the chat as you think of them. But any women pirates on his ships, or any of the ships, maybe?
Not on his ship. About a year or 15 months after Sam died, there were two very famous pirates, Anne Bonny and Mary Read. So everybody's heard of Anne Bonny and Mary Read and how they pretended to be men, and it's like, oh, they did it. Was it like Milan and nobody knew, and all of this? So just really quickly, Anne and Mary kind of came from opposite worlds. Mary was raised by her father. Mary was raised by her mother. Anne was raised by her father. Both of their parents decided, being single parents, look, it's going to be hard enough for this kid without being a girl. So their fathers raised them as boys. Mary was a footman, like when she was 13. Mary was in the Army, the Navy, and then became a pirate. And same thing, she was in the Army. So these were seasoned fighters, and these were women who got through life being men. Both of them attached themselves to Calico Jack Rackham, sort of the sexy, handsome, flamboyant pirate in the whole story. Jack got a vote of no confidence against Charles Vane. If you watch Blackbeard, if you watched Black Sails, you know about all these people. Very fictionalized, though. So long story short, they sail with Jack. Anne leaves her husband, James Bonny. They're in the Bahamas. At that time, right, so not only are single mothers whipped in the town square, but you could buy yourself out of a marriage. So Anne falls in love with Jack Rackham. Jack says, I'll give you 50 pounds, James Bonny, if you give me your wife, and she'll be my wife. Well, Woodes Rogers was very religious. He's the governor of Bahamas, I told you. Woodes says, I'll whip both of you. I'll whip both of you if this deal happens. So they run away. They do a lot of pirating. Anne and Mary are absolutely fierce. Now, they're both sleeping with Jack, and they get caught in the Caribbean. And Jamaica, I believe. And they go before the judge. And the night before, what had happened was that the Royal Navy comes with their ship. Jack and all of the men on the ship drop their weapons, and Anne and Mary are there with guns and swords. So sentence gets passed on all of them. 20-something people are all going to hang. Anne and Mary go up to the judge and they go, "Excuse me, judge, you can't hang us. And here's why. We're pregnant and you can't kill an innocent life." So they call in the doctors go in the cell. Yeah, they're both pregnant. So Jack is due to hang. So the night before, he goes to Anne Bonny's cell and he says, "Anne, I'm so sorry." And he's crying, and my baby and Mary's baby and our babies. And Anne looks at him and she says, "Well, Jack, maybe if you had fought like a man, you wouldn't die like a dog." So I always tell the teenage girls that one. They love it. So that's Anne Bonny and Mary Read. Yeah.
Okay. Wow. You just have all kinds of stories tied to all this. So here's a question. What happened to the gold and silver that was found on the sunken ship?
Right. So whatever washed up on shore was a cash grab. The government tried to get as much of it as possible. Of course, Eastham, Cape Cod. Other people put it in their pockets and went away and spent it. Most of it $400 million worth of treasure sat in that ship for 167 years, or 200? No, 167 years, until Barry Clifford found it. And that's the gold and silver. A good bit of it is this is where the controversy comes in. There's a whole big black market for ship artifacts. There's a man down in Florida that has a big museum in St. Augustine. I kind of got read in on a lot of stuff when I was in North Carolina in 2017. I was doing my show. I was at the historic grounds. There was a group of people called the Friends of the Queen Anne's Revenge. So this had been found by a private company. They went into business sort of with the government of North Carolina, and there was finger pointing. And, "Oh, you're using my material without permission. I'm not being paid. You're in defense of copyright." Some things wind up on the black market. I mean, private collectors want these things. But the bulk of it in Barry Clifford's case, think what you want about him, his methods, his motivations, and his lying. Most of it you can see these artifacts, but there is this very icky underbelly to these ship excavations, which is very, very pirate-like. So yeah.
I was just gonna say, are they like modern day pirates of this whole pirate? Okay, so I'm not wrong. Okay.
No, you're really not. And the governments behave badly because there's money in it. There's interest. People love pirates to this day. They love pirates, and there's money in it. And and it's right. Isn't it the big discussion now? Things are being taken out of museums. They're being reinstituted in the places they were taken from. So this is a raging debate that's very timely. Who should have this stuff? Should it be in private collections? Should it be in museums? Should it be in private museums like the one in Provincetown? The Whydah Museum is a private operation. Or should it be in a public museum under the custodian of proper archaeologists, maritime conservators? Yeah, so it's fact and fiction, art and life really overlap here. Yeah.
So here's another question. What can you tell us about the two survivors of the Whydah's sinking?
Oh, well, there were actually, right. So there were 9. One kind of turned on all of the others. There was a series of judgments. One of them was let off because he said, "Look, I was impressed. I was a carpenter. They forced me into it. I had no choice." Now, typically, Sam was of the mind that you don't force people, and people were lining up to join. Royal Navy men and merchantmen crews, they had no problem getting people. But if you were a doctor, if you were a carpenter, maybe a sailmaker or a net weaver, someone who had a very specific job, if the pirate crew was really needing that kind of thing. So Sam impressed this man, and he was able to get a separate trial. The 9th person, his name, I believe his first name was John or Juan, and he was a Mosquito Indian, they used to call them. He was sold into slavery. He didn't even go to trial. He was sold into slavery. Interesting enough, he was sold into slavery to John Adams' either father or grandfather. So very interesting that the Adams went on to be, abolitionists and so on and so forth. And certainly John Quincy Adams and the Amistad and all. The grandfather had a reputation. He was a farmer, I think, and a minister. And it might have been John Adams, actually his father. It makes sense that it was his father. Yeah, so the plot thickens. So that's what happened to him.
I'm going to ask a question that is more about you as a scholar, possibly portraying this character. So
Okay.
Dorothy sent me this one. From reading of Clifford's book, it seems like so little is actually known about Bellamy and his story. Is it acceptable for us to presume so much in order to flesh out a personality and a life story?
That is a great question. I was actually thinking about this earlier, although I hadn't read that one ahead of time. That was a surprise one.
It is.
Someone like Che Guevara had like a 40 or 50-year story, and someone like Allen Ginsberg had like a 60-year story. So pages and pages and pages. So what do you do with a guy named Samuel Bellamy, who we don't know that much about, who was only around, came to prominence in a couple of years? What scholars such as, and I follow in their footsteps, eminent scholars such as David Cordingly, who wrote Under the Black Flag, or Colin Woodward, who wrote The Republic of Pirates, do exhaustive research. I know one of the foremost experts on Blackbeard, a man named Bayless Brooks out of Florida. A lot of stuff is digitized now. You put pieces together, but what you do is you kind of archetype. You sort of make presumptions based on the little pieces that you have. A lot of what we have comes from reports of the captains that they robbed and from Royal Navy captains. So from the logs, from court reports. We know quite a bit about Sam and his philosophies because of those court transcripts. So of course he was the commanding officer. They're going to talk about that. Woodes Rogers and people of that ilk, when they took over the Bahamas, there was talk. Here's who ran it. Here was the idea. Here what was going on. Colin Woodward and others have pieced together that Sam was from Devonshire, that he went to Portsmouth, that he signed on with this captain. The name escapes me at the moment, but the captain that he sailed with for 10 years because there were ship's records. Remember that during the 10 years of the War of Spanish Succession, that they had letters of marque, so they were legal pirates. So there were very careful records kept. Also, too, there were records kept of who got what. Sam has a couple of speeches that he ends his story with that he'll present to you. One of them he calls everyone princes of the world, which is the title of my second novel in my Golden Age of Piracy series. But to go back to the core and really be the scholar now, I believe that we do have enough information about these larger personalities that we're filling in the gaps. And I write plays, I write novels, I'm really a historical education kind of guy, historical fiction guy. In the gaps is where we make our living as storytellers. But you try to narrow those gaps as much as possible. So nothing that Sam tells you, nothing that I told you about Sam tonight is purely made up. It is all based in fact. These guys were archetypes. These scholars that we study and we become scholars ourselves will tell you that 65% of the men engaged in man-man encounters. Like, it's amazing the data that they crunch. They know that only about 25% of them were married. They know that the median age was somewhere around 28. The sheer amount of data from the logs, from the stories, from this 10 years of very well documented history tell us so much. So the comfort level is high. The comfort level is high.
I don't see more questions coming in the chat, but put them in there. I'm going to keep asking if you don't. Talk more about this, your Golden Age of Piracy series. So what are the books that you have?
Oh, so it's called The Cannon and the Quill. And I was going to actually show them to you. They're actually on a shelf behind me. I'm not going to get up and get them. Unless you really want me to, I'll show them to you. They're about 3 feet away. But so my story sort of is I had always loved pirates. When I was a kid, I dressed up like a pirate. Sometimes my hair is very long, my beard, I have a couple of earrings, gold hoop earrings that I wear. And when my wife and I moved to the beach, just to get back to the beach, and we didn't want to go back to Jersey, we were in a meeting with the real estate agent, and she said, "Has anyone ever told you you look like a pirate?" And I said, "Yeah, sure, my whole life." And I have a pretty good year-round suntan, being Sicilian, natural suntan. And she said, "Well, we have this pirate group, and we do all this pirate stuff." And Blackbeard. Before I knew it, I was creative director at a edutainment company called Port City Tours. And I created ghost walks and historical events. And they said, "We would really love it if you did a pirate show." This was the first iteration. It was called The Legend of Blackbeard. This is a t-shirt from that tour. And I would take people on a walking tour of the streets, so on and so forth. So now for the past 7 years, I have been a pirate scholar, reading voraciously, learning everything that I can. Every new book that comes out, I read it, good, bad, and otherwise. People send me NPR articles and go, "Joey, tell us what's wrong. And what did they get wrong here?" So I've kind of, got an informal sort of PhD in pirating. And so I decided to write these novels. Let me just grab them. They're right behind. 1, 2, 3, 4.
You left us with a great image, though.
So there's 4 of them currently, and I'm working on the 5th. And so they're called The Cannon and the Quill. The Cannon is Blackbeard, and the Quill is Angus McGregor. So the challenge was, when they asked me to do a show about the Golden Age of Piracy, I decided to play 7 different pirates, and I've since added 1 more. Sam was always part of the story. And I needed somebody who knew all of them and outlived them and could tell their story. And so I love the Scottish accent. I love the Scottish. And so I was researching Rob Roy McGregor, because he was active at this time in the Jacobite Revolution, and he adopted a nephew. Here's a good, Delisa, here's a really good example of how we do this work sometimes. And remember, Chautauqua is different than historical fiction. I have a little more leeway in historical fiction. But Rob Roy McGregor at that time adopted a nephew of his brother and his sister-in-law, who were killed because they were Catholics and they wouldn't profess fealty to William of Orange. So nobody knows about this nephew. Well, as a storyteller, I can imprint anything I want on him. So when he's 17 years old, he's not going to inherit anything. All of Rob Roy McGregor's sons were bullies. And so Rob Roy sends him to the Caribbean, and he knows all of these people. And he's, Angus is called Quill because he's a scribe, and some people call him Scribe. I happened to sail for a couple years with the only legal privateer left in the United States, a man named Horatio Sinbad. Ronald Reagan, in a publicity stunt in 1979, 1982, made him a legal pirate after he won a yachting race in Jamaica. But he's got a gold tooth. Horatio Sinbad. He built his own pirate ship, a brigantine that I've sailed on many, many times. And he would always call me scribe. So yeah, so that's the cannon and the quill. And there's 4 of them. You can get them on Amazon or whatever. The first is called We All Be Jacobites Here. The second one is called Princes of the World, like I told you. The third one is called How to Be a Proper Pirate, and that tells the story of Stede Bonnet. And the fourth one is called All the Devils Are Here, which any Shakespearean scholars out there, that's a line from The Tempest. So I weave The Tempest in metaphor all the way through the series. So that's the series. Yeah, thank you for asking about that.
Yeah. Hey, we got a question.
Yeah.
Somebody says, I don't understand the term legal pirate.
Oh, yes. So a privateer is the technical term, and they would get a letter of marque, M-A-R-Q-U-E. So the War of Spanish Succession, think about you have Denmark, and you have England, you have France, you have Spain. Then you get into the Caribbean, you get into the Spanish Main, and you have the American colonies. Well, right in the middle of all of them is a vast expanse of water. So the 10 years of the War of Spanish Succession were mostly fought on the water. There were not a lot of big land battles. England didn't invade France, and there wasn't any of that. It was mostly a maritime battle. Well, yeah, the Royal Navy is completely bloated. I think the Treaty of Utrecht was signed in 1713 because they simply, none of them could afford it anymore. They were exhausted. So they all sat down, all the family members, like the 5 families of the mafia, and said, okay, you take this and you take that. And no, he's not going to sit on the throne. And no, the Catholics won't get this, and blah, blah, blah. But so to fill it out, you had all these merchantmen with ships, but it's a war. So the merchant lanes, the shipping lanes are somewhat disrupted anyway. So Delisa is a merchant captain. And I say to her as a minister in England, Delisa, I'm giving you a letter of marque. Now you can attack all of our enemy ships. You have the authority to do that. You will give 60% to me, and then you will keep 40% of yourself. It was a way to keep the battles going and keep the numbers up, and also fund the war, because you're stealing from all these people. That's what really became an issue and ushered in the 10 years of the golden age of piracy. Delisa's doing really well. She was a merchant person and she was making $15,000 a year. Now she's making $100,000 a year. And I come to her and I go, hey, guess what? The war's over. Go back to your 15 grand. But she has a choice. She could either do that, or she could say, no, I think I'm going to keep doing what I'm doing. And so that's how it worked. So that's what a letter of marque was. So it really was a publicity stunt for Horatio Sinbad to get this letter of marque. Obviously, he can't take his ship, which is called the Mika 2. He can't take it out because America, no, we technically don't have enemies. But I don't think he could have sailed, like, say, to the Persian harbors or anything like that and fired his cannon during the Gulf War. So, but that's how it worked. That's how it worked.
We got another question in. So what was the success rate of pirates? Meaning what percentage of pirates actually succeeded in stealing enough riches to retire and live off it? How many of them died in the process or quit because they were unsuccessful?
Wow. If you have about 3 hours, I can be comprehensive. But so let's look at this. The failure rate was extremely high. And the failure rate we know was extremely high because there was all this propaganda and legends, right? William Kidd, like he hung. Charles Vane saw him hang at the Royal Docks in between the Royal Navy Yards and a horrible place called Wapping, where again, like Charles Vane, we know nothing about him. So we tend to situate him in Wapping. We all agree Charles was so full of piss and wind and vinegar and had such a chip on his shoulder, he had to grow up in a horrific place. So the success rate. Now, let me go through some of the major pirates of the time. That'll probably be the best way to do it, and then I'll tell you about some of the legends. Benjamin Hornigold was the original Commodore of the Republic of Pirates. Very successful during the War of Spanish Succession. He turned pirate hunter. He turned against his men. Samuel was very successful. So Samuel, after that big score with the Whydah, he could have gone to Cape Cod and lived a very comfortable life. Charles Vane was hung. They never really had too much money. Jack Rackham was hung. Stede Bonnet, who left a very lucrative sugar plantation on Barbados, became a pirate because he hated his wife and couldn't deal with the death of his son, had a pirate ship built, outfitted it himself, and paid his men. He had some immense success until they almost died attacking a Spanish galleon. And then Blackbeard kind of adopted him and held him under his thumb. Blackbeard was fairly successful. The controversy with Blackbeard is this. What was Blackbeard's treasure? Well, in 1718, he gets La Concorde. He goes on a rampage. He's so angry about what happened in Massachusetts and all of this. But then he strikes a deal with the governor of North Carolina, Governor Eden, and his finance minister, whose name was Tobias Knight. At this time, 1717, 1718, the pirates are unbeatable. So Woodes Rogers says, you know how we ended it in Madagascar? We gave them all pardons. We said, you know what? If you just stop it, if you just swear fealty to the king, you can keep all your stuff, you'll be fine. So 1717, 1718, everybody's taking the pardon. That's when Benjamin Hornigold turned tail and became a traitor, so to speak. So Blackbeard strikes this deal, goes back to pirating, goes up and down the East Coast, has a little hideout at a place called Ocracoke, and he's really disrupting things. So North Carolina in the early 1700s was called a veil of humility between two mountains of conceit, those two mountains being Virginia and South Carolina. Why? Hampton Roads was a big deep water port. Charlestown, as it was called then, after the second king of the Restoration King of England, Charlestown was a deep water port. North Carolina, if you've ever sailed in North Carolina, the Outer Banks and all, it's treacherous, riptides, shifting sandbars, very difficult place to get in and out of. Big ships could not get in and out of North Carolina. Now, today, they have the big port at Morehead City. That changed, but not until the 20th century. So Blackbeard really makes the governor of Virginia very angry. This was a man named Alexander Spotswood. Alexandria, Virginia is named for him. If anybody out there is from West Virginia or knows West Virginia, they have the Golden Horseshoe. He led that expedition that led to the founding of the Golden Horseshoe. So he concocts a deal with the British Navy, highly illegal operation. So if you see in my paperwork or whatever that I say Blackbeard was assassinated, Blackbeard had taken the pardon. He's in collusion with the governor of North Carolina, which is a sovereign colony. Virginia, which is also a sovereign colony, co-ops the Royal Navy to attack his neighbor. So it'd kind of be like we're all in Ohio, right? Or most of us are in Ohio. It would be like if Ohio wanted to take over Kentucky. And so we sent the Royal Navy or an army, the National Guard, the Ohio National Guard, we sent into Kentucky. That's what it would be like. And so they assassinated him. So that's Blackbeard. Who else was a big deal? That was pretty much it. Not a happy story there at all. Blackbeard also probably had syphilis. Why are these shipwreck discoveries important? They found a silver a plunger full of mercury, pewter plunger, hypodermic, full of mercury. That's syphilis. That's how they treated it in those days. And Blackbeard got more and more erratic. In my novels, he gets syphilis. We know from his records that his men were down in the islands in the West Indies partying it up, and a lot of them it was called the pox. They called it the pox. So there's a record. He had to basically kidnap the doctor from La Concorde because he needed another doctor because all the men were sick. And we have records of some of these things. So here's another reason why we know that there was pretty much a low success rate. These legends, which are just off the hook. What do we know about William Kidd? Oh, he had this treasure, this big, vast treasure that everybody's looked for or whatever. But the story that is most interesting is a man named Henry Every, or Avery, because there was no standardization. If you're a pirate scholar, there's Teach, T-E-A-C-H. There's T-H-A-C-H-E because of Bayless Brooks. That's how I do it. Teach, but looks like Thatch. Some people spell it Thatch, and they call him Edward Thatch. So there was no standardization of spelling at the time, which makes it a challenge. So Henry Every. Henry Every grows up in the same place that Sam Bellamy does in Devonshire, England. Sam absolutely admires him. All the kids hear stories about Henry Every. Francis Drake was also from that area. So they grow up, and I think that's why Sam said, well, I'm just going to go out to sea because that's our heritage here in Devonshire. So Henry Every joins the Royal Navy. They get really, really kind of bored. He doesn't fit in. So he joins a merchant ship and they have a letter of marque. But the captain's incompetent. The captain is somewhat incompetent. And so nothing's getting done. So Henry Every leaves a mutiny, takes over the ship, and they go over on a rampage. Now they're over in the West Indies. It's the shipping lanes of the East India Company, so on and so forth. And here's where it gets weird. Supposedly, he robs the Grand Mogul of that area, the big honcho in the area, gets all kinds of riches, takes his daughter and marries her on top of it, and becomes the pirate king of Madagascar. So the story goes. It's a good tale to tell wannabe pirates. It's a good tale to tell young pirate crews who are feeling a little down on their luck. As best as we can tell, as best as we can put together, he probably died penniless, sick, not having married the Mogul's daughter. So most of the success stories are propaganda. The most successful pirate of all was Bartholomew Roberts, who history somewhat forgets, Black Bart, because Blackbeard is the star and it's very similar. He knocked over something like 250 ships, but he was killed. One day he lost. You know, 1719, 1720, he was a little after Blackbeard's time. He was a teetotaler, which makes him very interesting. He died. They killed him. So by the end, I'll tell you this, by the end of the golden age of piracy, they were hanging these guys 30, 40, 50 at a time. It was a huge spectacle. When you hung a pirate, you put him in a giblet and you hung him at the entrance of the harbor. If you've seen Pirates of the Caribbean, they touch on some of that. The other thing they would do is take the body and tie it to a pylon right at the shoreline where the crab pools were and let the tide come in and out for 3 days and the crabs eat on them. Also a deterrent. So yeah, that's the story. They called it a short and merry life.
Now, I don't know how this will tie into what you just said, but Dorothy just put in the chat, you're talking about the captains, but what about the crew? How and when was loot distributed? How did the men get home with their share if the captain had decided to retire or stay somewhere for a comfortable retirement?
Right. So let's go to the book for some specifics for you, but everything was done very democratically. You know what? I'm not even going to look at the book. It's okay. You guys can look at the book. Basically, shares were divvied out by percentages. So if you were the captain, the quartermaster, the sailing master, or the bosun, So those were the men who were really in charge of keeping the ship up and running, right? Quartermaster's sort of like a staff sergeant. He's the boots on the ground guy. Captain is the captain. Sailing master is in charge of navigation, upkeep of the ship. And then the bosun is really taking care of making sure it's careened, making sure that the cordage and sheets, as they call it, the sails and ropes, are taken care of. And then there were lesser shares for each of the men. If, say, you lost a leg, that was worth 100 pounds or 50 pounds. If you lost 2 legs, you got 100 pounds. You lost an arm and 2 legs, you got 150 pounds. You lost all 4, you got 200 pounds. So there was compensation for injury. Not things maybe like eye loss. Also, that whole thing about the patch. Yeah, sure, things are flying around, things are falling, things happen. Sometimes you lose an eye. Here's what the eye patch is about, folks. When you go underneath in the hold, it's pitch black. So if you had duty down below, you put a patch over your eye for an hour. When you go down, that eye has acclimated to the darkness. You take off the patch, and while the other eye is acclimating, you have much better vision than you would have otherwise. That's really what an eye covering is about. So crews, like, you didn't have to sign on for X amount of time. Like the average age was 25, 27, so nobody was really getting home clean. But Sam gave all of his guys 50 pounds of gold and silver. That's pretty, 50 weight pounds, 50 pounds. They would have been set up great, except for the fact that they died. When Blackbeard downsized the QAR, and I am of the school, you'll hear 2 different things. I am of the school that he grounded the QAR on purpose. He swung a deal with the governor of North Carolina through his quartermaster, William Howard, who was from the area. I believe that he had syphilis. He knew his time was winding down. He was in charge of 400 men and 5 ships. We have a diary entry from Blackbeard that says basically the rum is gone. Don't know if we're going to make it through the night, hard times. And then like some days later, just knocked over a ship. We got plenty of rum. Everybody's happy. But the way I translate it in my novels based on my research is that he had it. He was tired. It was too many men. The Royal Navy was starting to come down on them. And a lot of guys got out with the pardon. So if you took the pardon, maybe your fellow pirates who didn't take the pardon were like, oh, you dirty, rotten so-and-so, but you got to keep all your stuff. And nobody stole your stuff. Like there aren't too many stories of, oh, we all got 10 pounds. And then when Sam was sleeping, someone snuck into his bunk and stole his 10 pounds. Did it happen? Probably. No honor among thieves. So we know it wasn't a smart idea to be married because you may never come home again. Your average age was somewhere 25, 26, 27. You knew this. So they called each other the brethren of the sea. They talked about a short and merry life. They talked about going out on the account. So it was kind of like, you know, think about the Wild West outlaws, right? I don't think anybody was really thinking about retiring. Some of the guys may have. I will dispel, when I used to do the walking tour and I used to do the tour at the historic site, I would say, hey, Dad or Mom, did you get paid yesterday? It was Friday. Did you get paid? Oh, yeah, I got paid. Did you bury it in your backyard? No, I didn't bury it in my backyard. It's kind of absurd, the idea that they would bury their treasure. This gives the idea, the impression that we had money to spare. We didn't have money to spare. We didn't have sails to spare. We didn't have cordage to spare. We didn't have rum or beer. So why rum and beer, right? That's a thing. People go, oh, they were drunk. They drank rum and beer all the time. Standing water spoils. So in the Royal Navy, everybody got a pint of rum and a gallon of beer. That was your ration for the day. That was even in the Royal Navy. There just wasn't anything else to drink, and you gotta stay hydrated. I just had another thought. Oh, so taking the pardon, you might get out. But, you know, there was a sneaky little thing. And the U.S. Navy, it happened in Cuba with Havana, right? You come into dock, we got women, we got drink, you spend your pay. So typically that's what would happen. A ship would go into dock, your pockets were lined, and there was a whole slew of people whose job was to drain you, happily drain you of all of your money while you were in dock. So I think it was a living a paycheck to paycheck kind of thing. I don't think there was any grand scheme of, oh, I'm going to go back home and I'm going to get a gilded carriage and I'm going to be, that's why Sam is so crucial to me. Sam was the guy who was like, I got a couple years to do this thing, make my name, make my money so that I can go back and I can marry Goody. I'll be a Jacobite, so that was really it. I don't recommend it. That's my short answer. I don't recommend it. It was not glamorous. There was scurvy and other. I'll show you if you don't mind. We had a dagger. This is sort of a pirate's or a thief's rosary that you could strangle someone with. You made knots every inch or so. You had your musket, which you could also use as a club. It's got this, sorry about the background, makes it hard, but it's got this big metal club on it. The Spanish, okay? The Spanish had these. They had these, right? These fancy swords that are very long and about touches, I'm about a little short of 6 foot tall. And these are toe-to-toe stabby little things, okay? A pirate, and it was very similar to what the Royal Navy had this. It's short, much shorter, as you saw. The blade is thicker and heavier. This is not a stabby sword. This is a bone breaker. This is a slash sword. This is break bone, break rib, all of those other kinds of things. It has this knob on the end here. This is great for busting an occipital lobe or busting somebody's teeth out or hitting them in the side of the head and braining them. And then you also have this piece here. Incredibly brutal warfare. And I will tell you, folks, the records of why the heck would you want to leave the Royal Navy and become a pirate? You could be lashed for the slightest infraction. Some called it pox above, hell below, talking about a ship. Royal Navy captains were every bit as vicious as the Edward Lowes and all of that, because their rule was law. If you've ever seen, right, the Mutiny, right, Captain whatever his name is there, that's the kind of brutal discipline. It was a horrible, brutal world, and that's why so not a fun life.
I love it that we got some show and tell. We've got one last question that I'll give you.
Okay.
That's a pretty specific one. And are there any pirate ships? I'm assuming she means sunken, but at Mystic, Connecticut.
Oh, that's out of my area, because none of the pirates I study from the golden age of piracy, the major pirates, went up to Connecticut. The furthest north that any of Sam went to Massachusetts. Connecticut and New York are more like the late 1600s. There might be, I don't know of any battles or anything like that. Now, if it's a trick question, please just let us know, did a ship sink off the coast of Mystic, Connecticut? It very well may have, but I don't know of any specific stories. It was a very big deal that they found the Whydah. Now, Florida, the Caribbean, ships, hurricanes, everything. I think it was 1689. Jamaica, some 50 ships got wiped out. I will tell you, down North Carolina, see, I just don't know that area. I do know what's called the Crystal Coast, right? So the southern half of the Outer Banks is called the graveyard of the Atlantic. And there's some 350 ships. Little tidbit out of the time range, but many of those ships were oil tankers that were sunk by German U-boats in 1942, 1943, which is a whole nother story. I don't really think so. Philadelphia was a big port. And of course, Boston and Philadelphia were the big ports up in that area there.
Well, Joey, thank you so much. The
You're welcome.
stories are amazing, and I hope people can come back and hear Sam tell his own story in the summer. I do love that we got to see some of the artifacts that you have, and I thought we were going to make it all the way through the night without the eye patch coming up. So I was fascinated to know what that was really about, but there was still really not much of a mention of peg legs.
No, because and let's be honest, that's a real thing. I mean, cannonballs do a lot of damage, or falling from a crow's nest and shattering your leg. If they were paying 50 pounds for a lost leg, legs were getting lost if they built it into the paperwork.
Yeah.
You know, if it was part of the negotiation. Yeah.
Well, we really appreciate you sharing all of the details. And I love it that we got not just stuff about Samuel Bellamy, but about other pirates as well, which I think really enriches everyone's experience who gets to come to the actual Chautauqua event. So we appreciate you giving us that background.
Oh, you're welcome.
Yeah. And everybody keep in mind, we will send a follow-up and do links to Joey's books that he talked about, but then he mentioned a couple of other books. So don't worry if you didn't catch all of that. By this weekend, we'll be sending a follow-up email to everyone. And do remember, if you've been here before, you know this. If you're new to this, you don't know this, but we have a survey that'll pop up as you leave. And that's really helpful for us, not only to improve our programming, but for our grant, the grants that we apply for. It's really helpful to get some sort of data about how successful things are and what you liked about it. Lori put the survey in the chat, but it should also pop up instantly as you leave. Okay, well, this has been a lot of fun. And I appreciate all the great questions. We got really good questions and from several different people, and that always makes these interesting. Come back for our April 27th Harry Houdini book talk, and that will be yet another interesting adventure character to learn about. And don't forget, if you can make it to Ashland, Ohio, July 11th through the 15th, or we will all be there. All right, thanks everyone for coming. Thanks, Joey, for being here.
You're welcome. Thanks for having me.
All
Thanks
your
for
knowledge.
listening. Okay.
All right, I will let you all go on with your evening, and I appreciate you showing up. Bye-bye.